A company calling itself the Young Women in Business Network has challenged the South African Reserve Bank to reform its licensing regulations to create space for young black entrepreneurs to participate in the banking sector. The group led a march earlier today to petition the bank. It says its strategic intent is to establish the first black mutual bank owned by women in the country. The Young Women in Business Network is a cooperative financial institution, a deposit-taking financial cooperative registered in December 2015. Well, joining us now on the phone line to discuss access opportunities in South Africa's banking sector is a banking analyst, Koki Kooiman. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us here on Afro Prime. And let's just talk about opportunities and access to these opportunities. What exactly are the stumbling blocks for black banks specifically?
Well, for any bank or for any player who wants to start a bank, there are a couple of stumbling blocks always. The first one is that for banking to be successful, you need a certain size. You need a certain size to cope with the costs. And the costs are twofold. The first one is there's a very heavy regulatory burden on banks and on insurance companies, on the financial services industry, and that is mainly to protect the client and to protect the public and to protect the taxpayer, because in the end the bank takes deposits from the public, and so when the bank doesn't use those deposits wisely, as we had with BSB Bank where it was all squandered or lost through fraud, then the taxpayer has to step in to pay depositors. And so the second one is where a lot of the cost is in technology. It's very expensive to set up the technology to be competitive in the banking space today. And so that's why you need a certain size. But I think the third one that is obviously necessary is you need funding. So you need deposits, but for you to attract deposits in the market, the depositors need to trust you. So there's normally quite a heavy marketing or advertising spend, and it takes time just to build that trust over quite a long period.
If the Reserve Bank were to allow more banks to actually become players in the sector, and we won't have just the big top 4 banks, and we actually had more banks, do you think that perhaps there are enough customers to go around? I mean, competition as well is a key factor that you just mentioned now. Do you think perhaps that the sustainability of these new banks would be affected by how many consumers would actually trust them enough with their money?
Yeah, I think you summed it up right. It's the word trust, because certainly there are enough customers to go around. If you look at a bank like Capitec, that's been incredibly successful, but it's taken them effectively 18 years to grow from being very small and insignificant to now be, the third largest bank in South Africa. And they took clients away from the other banks largely by offering a better service, a better product, and at a lower cost. But it took them a long time. It took them 18 years. So, like with any other industry, it's not something that you can just step in and start. It will take shareholders with a long-term vision and management who slowly and surely build that trust with depositors.
And how do you think the banking sector can actually be changed to accommodate a higher rate of success of some of these newer banks? Because you just mentioned that they need to probably survive for a longer term before they can gain consumer confidence.
Well, having a lot of new players in the banking sector isn't necessarily a good thing for the country. I mean, it's a good thing for competition for the clients, for the consumer both, and also for those who lend from banks. But remember that your banking sector is very, very important for the stability of an economy. And so when something goes wrong with a bank, there's normally quite a big shock to the system, a big stampede, people trying to take deposits away. So you always want to make sure that your banking system is stable. And in South Africa, we've actually had a remarkable track record over many years, with only many, many years ago Sambo, and then later African Bank. And for the rest of banking sector has been strong. So but I think it is important to always have competition. And so what I think the smaller banks or new banks who will start with just operating in a segment of the market, almost like Capitec did, where you just start with the personal loans market. And then as you grow a customer base, you grow your brand, then from there you can start offering other products. And I think the smaller banks who have started will start always in that way, just targeting a very specific segment.
So do you think that perhaps there should be a cap then on the number of banks that the country has? As you mentioned, the banking sector is quite important to the country's economic stability.
That's an interesting question. I don't think we've actually ever had a specific number in mind, and I've seen it in many other countries where often you have a wave of new banks being allowed to start operating, and that you normally find that when the economy starts growing, and then some of them fail, and it always sort of goes back to a certain number. A country of our size can generally handle, let's say, 12 banks. But there will always be those who then merge or who fall over. But certainly, I think we can do with a few more banks, and specifically initially starting in certain segments. And I think the Reserve Bank is trying to encourage that, but they will always be very strict in making sure that the banks who start have got good shareholders, in other words, shareholders who can make sure there's enough capital, and obviously that the directors and the officials of the bank have enough banking experience. The big problem actually with banking, the obviously first one is to get direct deposits, but the most difficult part is to lend judiciously. Anybody can lend money, but to able to collect the money again is quite difficult. So you find the banks that have problems normally are the ones who lend injudiciously and then can't collect the money, which means the depositors in the end lose. So the Reserve Bank will always make sure that the bank has a very strong management team who can make sure that the bank is viable over the longer term.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us here this evening and for your expertise in this matter. That was a banking analyst, Koki Kooiman.